Commander Jacob Hayes stood in the massive hall of the Galactic Council and felt the weight of 200 alien species staring down at him. The chamber was built from some kind of crystal that glowed with its own light, and the ceiling stretched so high above that he could barely see it. He wore his Earth Defense Fleet uniform and carried no weapons because the Council did not allow them. Behind him stood Ambassador Lisa Monroe, who had spent the last 6 months learning how to speak with aliens, and now she would help him make the case for humanity to join this ancient organization. The Council speaker was a creature called Thress, who looked like a giant insect with 6 legs and mandibles that clicked when it talked. Thress stood on a platform higher than all the others, and when it spoke, its voice boomed through translation devices that turned the alien sounds into words Jacob could understand. The speaker looked down at the 2 humans, and its compound eyes reflected the light in strange ways. Jacob cleared his throat and began to speak. He told the Council that humanity had discovered faster than light travel only 5 years ago, and in that time they had explored 50 star systems and found evidence of this great galactic civilization. He said that Earth wanted to join the community of worlds and share knowledge and trade with other species. He spoke clearly and calmly, even though his heart was pounding, because he knew that what happened here would determine the future of every human being alive. When Jacob finished speaking, Thress made a sound that might have been laughter. The translation device turned it into a dry chuckle that echoed through the chamber. Thress said that many species had come before the Council seeking membership, and all of them had learned the same lesson. The galaxy was not a safe place, and it was not ruled by democracy or friendship. It was ruled by fear, and the source of that fear was a species called the Vakreen. Lisa stepped forward and asked what the Vakreen were. Thress explained that the Vakreen had existed for over 50,000 years, and they had developed weapons that could destroy entire star systems. Every species in the Council had joined only after the Vakreen had demonstrated their power, and every species lived under the shadow of those weapons. Thress said that the Vakreen enforced peace across the galaxy by making sure that every civilization knew what would happen if they started a war or refused to obey the Council's laws. Jacob felt a chill run down his spine, but he kept his face calm. He asked what kind of weapons the Vakreen possessed. Thress clicked its mandibles, and the chamber filled with holographic images that floated in the air above the Council floor. The first image showed a device called the World Breaker, which could cause a planet's core to collapse and turn a living world into a ball of molten rock. The second image showed the Stellar Forge, which could inject exotic matter into a star and make it explode into a supernova that would destroy everything in the system. The third image showed the Shadow Fleet, which were ships that existed partially outside normal space and could not be detected or attacked by conventional weapons. The holograms showed recordings of these weapons being used. Jacob watched as planets died and stars exploded and entire civilizations vanished in moments. He heard gasps from some of the other Council members who had clearly seen these images before, but still found them disturbing. Lisa stood beside him, and he could feel her tension even though she did not move or speak. Thress said that humanity would need to prove they understood the power of the Vakreen before they could join the Council. The speaker said that every species had to make a choice between submission and extinction. Thress asked Jacob if humans were prepared to live under Vakreen rule and obey their commands without question. Jacob took a breath and said that humans would need to meet the Vakreen first before making any decisions. The chamber fell completely silent. Even the background hum of the translation devices seemed to stop. Thress leaned forward and its antennae quivered. The speaker said that no species had ever asked to meet the Vakreen as equals. Every other species had immediately submitted after seeing the weapons demonstrations. Lisa activated a small device she had brought with her, and new holograms appeared in the chamber. These showed scenes from Earth's history. Jacob watched as images of human wars filled the air above the Council floor. There were ancient battles with swords and spears, and then more modern wars with guns and tanks. There were images of the 2 atomic bombs that had been dropped on cities during the Second World War. There were pictures of missiles that could carry nuclear warheads across continents. There were charts showing how many times humanity had almost destroyed itself during the Cold War. Lisa spoke in a quiet voice that somehow carried through the entire chamber. She said that humans had already faced extinction many times. She said that humanity had built weapons capable of destroying their own world, and had come within minutes of using them. She explained that humans understood the terror of living under the threat of total annihilation, because they had lived with that fear for generations. She said that Earth had dozens of nations that had all pointed weapons at each other, and any one of them could have ended human civilization. She said that humanity had learned to step back from the edge of destruction not because they were not afraid, but because they had decided that survival was worth the effort of controlling their fear. Thress stared at the images and did not speak for a long time. Finally, the speaker said that nuclear weapons were primitive compared to Vakreen technology. Jacob smiled and said that he understood, but that humanity still wanted to meet the Vakreen and learn about them. He said that humans did not believe in ruling through fear, and did not believe that any species should have to live in terror. He said that if the Vakreen were as powerful as Thress claimed, then they should have nothing to fear from meeting with humans. The council chamber erupted in noise as representatives from dozens of species began talking at once. Some were angry and some were frightened and some seemed confused. Thress raised one of its legs and the chamber fell silent again. The speaker said that the council would send humanity's request to the Vakreen and that Jacob and Lisa should return to their ship and wait. Thress said that no one knew how the Vakreen would respond to such an unusual request, but that humanity would learn soon enough whether their courage was bravery or foolishness. 3 months passed before the Vakreen answered humanity's request, and when they came they did not send a message or a small ship. They sent a vessel so enormous that it had its own gravity field, and when it appeared in orbit around Earth without any warning, its shadow fell across entire continents. Admiral Peter Grant was on the bridge of the human flagship Liberty when the sensors started screaming alerts about the massive object that had just materialized above the planet. Peter had served in the Earth Defense Fleet for 20 years, and he had seen combat during the corporate wars that had nearly torn human civilization apart before the governments of Earth had finally united. He was a calm man who did not panic easily, but when he saw the size of the Vakreen ship on his displays, he felt his mouth go dry. The vessel was larger than some of Earth's moons, and it radiated energy readings that were off every scale his crew had ever calibrated. Lieutenant Karen Foster sat at the sensor station, and her hands moved quickly across her controls as she tried to make sense of what the instruments were telling her. She had been the top graduate of the Fleet Academy and had specialized in xenotechnology, but nothing in her training had prepared her for this. She reported that the Vakreen ship was generating power equivalent to a small star and that its hull was made of materials that should not be able to exist according to human physics. The communications officer announced that the Vakreen were sending a message. Peter told him to put it on the main screen. The image that appeared showed a being that looked like a pillar of living metal that constantly shifted and changed shape. The surface of its body rippled like water and reflected light in ways that hurt to look at directly. When it spoke, the voice seemed to come from everywhere at once, and the translation system struggled to keep up. The being identified itself as Archon Vex of the Vakreen Supremacy. It said that humanity had made an unusual request to meet with the Vakreen as equals, and that this had never happened before in the 10,000 years that the Vakreen had ruled the galaxy. Vex said that the Vakreen had come to demonstrate their power so that humans would understand why every other species feared them and obeyed them without question. Peter stood and faced the screen with his hands clasped behind his back. He said that humanity appreciated the Vakreen coming to meet with them, and that Earth was ready to learn about Vakreen technology. He kept his voice steady and professional, even though every instinct told him to be afraid of the massive ship that could probably destroy his entire planet with a single weapon. Vex's metallic form rippled, and the being said that humans would now witness the world-breaker. The main screen switched to show a view of Jupiter's moons. Peter recognized one of the smaller satellites that human scientists had been studying for possible mining operations. He watched as a beam of light shot from the Vakreen ship and crossed the distance to Jupiter in seconds. The beam struck the small moon, and the satellite simply vanished. It did not explode or break apart. It just stopped existing as if it had never been there at all. The bridge of the Liberty was completely silent. Peter saw his crew staring at their screens in shock. Navigator Danny Cooper was a young officer who had joined the fleet straight out of college, and Peter saw the man's jaw clench, but Danny kept his hands steady on his controls and did not say anything. Peter knew that his crew was waiting to see how he would react, and he knew that if he showed fear, then they would feel it too. Peter looked at the screen and said that the weapon was impressive. Vex seemed surprised by the calm response. The Vakreen asked if humans understood what they had just seen. Peter said that he understood the moon had been destroyed by some kind of matter disruption beam. He asked if the Worldbreaker worked by unraveling atomic bonds or if it used a different mechanism. Vex's form rippled faster, and the being said that humans should be terrified, not curious. Peter replied that fear and curiosity were not opposites, and that humans had always tried to understand things that frightened them. He said that understanding was how humanity had survived everything from ice ages to nuclear weapons. The Vakreen seemed uncertain how to respond. After a moment, Vex said that humans would now see the stellar forge. The screen showed a different star system that Peter did not recognize. There were several planets orbiting a yellow sun that looked similar to Earth's sun. Vex explained that this system had once been inhabited by a species that had refused to obey Vakreen commands. The Vakreen ship released a swarm of dark objects that flew toward the sun. Within minutes, the star began to grow brighter and then it collapsed inward before exploding in a massive supernova. The planets were consumed instantly and the entire system became a cloud of burning gas. Karen spoke up from her station and asked how the stellar forge worked. She asked if the Vakreen introduced exotic matter into the stellar core, or if they used gravitational manipulation to trigger the collapse. Her voice was respectful but genuinely interested. Vex's form stopped rippling and the being asked why humans were asking about mechanisms when they should be begging for mercy. Peter said that his crew were scientists and soldiers, and that fear did not help anyone understand anything. He said that humanity had faced many threats over its history and had always tried to learn from them, rather than just submit to them. He said that the Vakreen weapons were certainly powerful, but that power alone did not make something right or good. Vex said that the Vakreen possessed weapons that humans could not even imagine. The being described the Shadow Fleet, which existed in dimensions that humanity had not discovered yet. Vex talked about temporal disruptors that could erase events from history and reality anchors that could change the laws of physics in local space. The Vakreen said that they were invincible and that no force in the galaxy could challenge them. Peter listened to all of this, and then he said that invincible was a strong word. He said that in human history many empires and nations had believed themselves invincible, and all of them had eventually learned otherwise. He said that humanity was not threatening the Vakreen and did not want to fight them, but that humans also did not believe that invincibility was real. He said that humanity wanted to coexist peacefully with the Vakreen and with all the other species in the galaxy. Vex asked if Peter was challenging Vakreen supremacy. Peter said no. He said that he was just refusing to be intimidated and that there was a difference between those two things. He said that humanity understood that the Vakreen were powerful, but that humans had also learned that power did not have to mean domination. He said that cooperation and mutual respect were stronger than fear in the long run. The transmission ended suddenly. The Vakreen ship vanished from orbit as quickly as it had appeared. One moment it was there and the next moment it was gone. Captain Helen Price, who was Peter's second in command, let out a breath she had been holding. She asked if challenging the Vakreen like that had been wise. Peter looked at the empty space where the massive ship had been and said that he had not challenged them. He had just refused to bow down to them, and there was a difference between those things too. 2 weeks after the Vakreen had demonstrated their weapons, the Galactic Council called an emergency session, and Jacob Hayes returned to the Crystal Chamber with Ambassador Lisa Monroe. When they arrived, they found the Council in chaos with representatives from dozens of species arguing in their various languages and the translation devices working overtime to keep up with all the different conversations happening at once. Thress, the council speaker, finally managed to restore order by raising several of its legs and making a loud, clicking sound that cut through all the noise. The insectoid being looked down at the two humans and said that something unprecedented had happened. Thress explained that the Vakreen were confused by humanity's response to their weapons demonstration. Never before had a species witnessed Vakreen power and responded with questions instead of immediate submission. Archon Vex had decided that humanity needed to face a test to prove whether their courage was real or just foolishness born of ignorance. Jacob asked what kind of test the Vakreen had in mind. Thress explained that the Vakreen would attack one of humanity's colony worlds, and that humans would have 7 days to either evacuate the colony or attempt to defend it. If humanity chose to evacuate, then they would be granted junior membership in the Galactic Council. and placed under Vacrine protection like all the other species. If humans tried to defend the colony and failed, then Earth would be conquered and absorbed into the Vacrine supremacy. If somehow humanity succeeded in defending the colony, then the Vacrine would negotiate with humans as equals. Lisa asked which colony the Vacrine had chosen. Thress said it was New Horizon, which was a mining settlement in the Kepler system with about 50,000 human residents. Lisa pulled up information on her tablet and saw that New Horizon was not a military base. It was a civilian colony with families and workers and scientists who had gone there to build a new life among the stars. Jacob felt anger rising in his chest, but he kept his voice calm when he spoke. He said that using civilians as a test was not honorable. Thress clicked its mandibles and said that the Vacrine had chosen New Horizon precisely because it was a civilian colony. They wanted to see if humanity valued its people enough to defend them against impossible odds, or if humans would make the logical choice to evacuate and save lives. Jacob looked at Lisa and saw the same determination in her eyes that he felt. He said that there was nothing logical about abandoning their people, and that humanity would defend New Horizon. Thress warned that the Vacrine would not hold back their power, and that the human fleet would be destroyed. Jacob said that humanity understood the risk but would face it anyway. 7 days later, the human fleet arrived at New Horizon. Admiral Peter Grant commanded 30 ships, which was everything Earth could spare without leaving the homeworld defenseless. It was not a large fleet by galactic standards, but every ship had been upgraded with the best weapons and shields that human engineers could build. Peter stood on the bridge of the Liberty and looked at the peaceful blue and green world below where 50,000 humans lived and worked. Captain Helen Price was coordinating evacuation efforts on the ground. She had landed with a team of transport ships and was organizing the colonists who wanted to leave. Peter had given orders that anyone who wished to evacuate would be taken to safety, but he was not surprised when most of the colonists chose to stay. These were people who had traveled light years from Earth to build something new, and they were not going to abandon their homes without a fight. Colonel Rick Turner commanded the small defense force that New Horizon maintained for dealing with pirates and other minor threats. Rick met with Peter through a video link and reported that they had evacuated all the children and elderly residents who were willing to go. About 30,000 colonists had chosen to remain and help defend the colony. Rick said that the people were afraid but determined, and that they trusted the fleet to protect them. On the surface, Dr. Amy Wells was organizing civilian defense teams. She had been a surgeon back on Earth before joining the colony as the chief medical officer. Now she found herself coordinating the construction of emergency shelters and setting up triage centers for the wounded that would inevitably come. Her assistant was a nurse named Greg Harris who kept saying that they should all evacuate while they still had time. Amy understood his fear, but she also understood why people were staying. She told Greg that if they evacuated, then the galaxy would see humans as a species that abandoned their homes when threatened. She said that sometimes you had to make a stand even when the odds were against you, because giving up without trying was worse than losing while fighting. The days passed slowly as the colonists prepared for battle. Engineers reinforced the colony's shields and soldiers dug defensive positions around the main settlement. Civilian volunteers trained in basic combat and first aid. Mining ships that normally harvested asteroids were retrofitted with military-grade shields. Everyone knew that the Vacrine could probably destroy the colony in minutes, but no one suggested surrendering. On the 7th day, the Vacrine fleet arrived. It was smaller than Peter had expected with only 3 ships, but each vessel radiated energy levels that made his entire fleet look like toys. The largest ship was the one that had visited Earth, and Peter recognized Archon Vex's metallic form when the communication channel opened. Vex's voice boomed across all frequencies. The being said that humanity had chosen to defend the colony, and that this was irrational. Vex said that humans could not possibly win against Vacrine weapons, and that choosing to fight was choosing to die. The Vacrine asked why humanity would make such an illogical choice when evacuation would save so many lives. Peter opened a channel and his voice was steady when he replied. He said that humans were probably going to lose, but that they were going to try anyway. He said that the people of New Horizon had built their homes with their own hands, and that they deserved to have someone stand up for them. He said that humanity did not abandon family, and that every person, on that planet was part of the human family. Vex asked why humans would sacrifice themselves for one colony when the species as a whole could survive by evacuating. Peter said that it was because the colonists were their people and New Horizon was their home. He said that humans did not leave family behind no matter what the cost. He said that this was something the Vakreen might not understand because they had ruled through fear for so long that they had forgotten what it meant to fight for something you loved rather than something you feared. There was a long silence. Then Vex said that this was not logical. Peter smiled grimly and said that logic was not everything. He said that there were things worth dying for and that protecting your people was one of them. He told Vex that the human fleet was ready and that the Vakreen should begin their attack whenever they wanted. Vex's metallic form rippled on the screen. The being said that humanity's courage was either admirable or foolish, and that the battle would determine which. The transmission ended and the Vakreen ships moved into attack positions. Peter looked at his crew and saw fear in their eyes but also determination. He gave the order for all ships to prepare for combat and the fleet moved to intercept the Vakreen vessels. Below on the surface of New Horizon, the colonists watched the sky and waited to see if humanity's courage would be enough to save them from the most powerful force in the galaxy. The first Vakreen ship moved into position above New Horizon's northern hemisphere, and Admiral Peter Grant watched as its weapons began to charge. The Liberty's sensors screamed warnings about energy levels that were climbing beyond anything the instruments had been designed to measure. Peter had fought in battles before, but he had never faced an enemy that could destroy his entire fleet with a single shot. He gave the order for all ships to scatter, and the human vessels spread across orbital space to avoid giving the Vakreen a clustered target. The Worldbreaker, weapon fired and a beam of impossible brightness, lanced down toward the main colony settlement. Peter knew that if the beam reached the surface, then 50,000 people would die instantly. He opened his mouth to give an order, but before he could speak, something incredible happened. 60 civilian mining ships moved into the path of the beam. These were not warships. They were simple vessels designed to extract ore from asteroids. But they had one advantage. Their shields were built to withstand the heat and radiation of working close to stars. The mining ships activated their shields, and the Worldbreaker beam struck them. The energy was too much for the civilian vessels to handle. 43 ships vaporized instantly, and their crews died without even having time to scream. But the shields had done their job. The beam's power was broken and scattered, and the remaining energy splashed harmlessly against New Horizon's atmosphere. Peter felt grief hit him like a physical blow. Those mining ship crews had been civilians. They had volunteered to act as a shield knowing they would probably die. Archon Vex's voice came over the communication channel and there was something new in it. Disbelief. The Vakreen said that the humans who had died were not soldiers. They were civilians who had sacrificed themselves. Vex asked why they would do such a thing. Peter's voice was tight with emotion when he answered. He said that the mining crews had volunteered and that they had known the risk. He said they had bought the colony time and that their sacrifice would not be wasted. He gave orders to Captain Helen Price, who commanded a squadron of fast attack corvettes. Helen's ships were small and maneuverable, and they dove toward the first Vakreen vessel with all weapons firing. The corvettes launched missiles as fast as their systems could cycle. The Vakreen shields absorbed the impacts easily, but Helen did not order her ships to break off. Instead, she brought them closer using their small size to dart around the massive alien vessel. The Vakreen ship's defensive weapons opened fire and bright beams of energy carved through space. 2 corvettes exploded instantly, but the rest kept coming. Helen saw what she was looking for. The Worldbreaker weapon had overheated from its first shot, and there was a junction point where the weapon housing connected to the main hull. She ordered all her remaining ships to concentrate their fire on that single point. Missiles streaked through space and slammed into the junction. For a moment, nothing happened. Then cracks appeared in the Vakreen hull and energy began leaking from the damaged weapon array. The Worldbreaker was not destroyed, but it was damaged. It would take time to repair. Peter allowed himself a moment of hope before he saw the second Vakreen ship moving into a new position. His sensors officer, Lieutenant Karen Foster, ran calculations and her face went pale. She reported that the second ship was preparing to use the stellar forge. If the Vakreen ignited the system's sun, then everyone would die within minutes and there would be no time to evacuate anyone. Peter asked if there was any way to stop them. Karen said that human weapons could not penetrate Vakreen shields. Then she looked up with a desperate idea in her eyes. She said that the damaged world breaker on the first ship was still functional. If they could somehow take control of it, they might be able to use it against the second Vakreen vessel. Helen said that was impossible through the communication channel. To do that, they would need to board the Vakreen ship and fight through its defenses and hack technology that humans barely understood. Karen said she would do it. She had been studying Vakreen systems since the first demonstration. She said that if Peter gave her a strike team and a boarding shuttle, then she would find a way. Peter made the decision in seconds. He told Karen to take 12 Marines and do whatever she had to do. Helen's corvettes would provide cover for the boarding operation. Karen grabbed her gear and ran for the shuttle bay. She had never been in combat before, but she did not hesitate. The boarding shuttle launched and raced toward the damaged Vakreen ship. The alien vessel's defenses were focused on the attacking corvettes and did not notice the small shuttle until it was too late. The shuttle crashed through a damaged section of hull and the strike team poured out into the alien corridors. The Vakreen defenders were metallic warriors that moved with inhuman speed. Sergeant Nick Palmer led the point squad and his Marines fought with everything they had. Nick was a veteran who had served in Earth's bloodiest conflicts and he knew how to fight in close quarters. He and his team cleared corridors room by room while Karen directed them toward the Worldbreaker Control Center. The Vakreen ship's interior was like nothing the Marines had ever seen. The walls seemed to shift and change and the corridors did not follow any logic that human minds could easily grasp. But Karen had studied the ship's layout during the earlier demonstration, and she guided them through the maze. The team lost 3 Marines to Vakreen defenders, but the rest kept pushing forward. They reached the Worldbreaker Control Center and Karen ran to the alien controls. Her hands shook as she tried to make sense of the interface. The Vakreen technology was far more advanced than anything humans had built, but it followed certain logical principles. Karen had always been good at seeing patterns, and she began to understand how the system worked. She told Nick that she could not fully control the weapon, but she could destabilize it. She could make it discharge all its stored energy at once in a single massive uncontrolled burst. Nick asked if she could aim it at the second Vakreen ship. Karen said maybe if they were lucky. She made the final connections and the Worldbreaker weapon began to shudder. Karen shouted for everyone to run. The team raced back through the corridors as alarms blared throughout the Vakreen ship. They reached the boarding shuttle and launched just as the Worldbreaker weapon tore itself apart. The explosion was massive. The damaged weapon released all its energy in an uncontrolled discharge that carved through space like the hand of an angry god. The beam was far more powerful than any normal shot, and it struck the second Vakreen ship just as it was about to activate the stellar forge. The second alien vessel exploded in a flash of light that lit up the entire star system. On the ground, Colonel Rick Turner and his soldiers had been fighting Vakreen ground forces that had landed near the colony. The alien warriors were tough and seemed immune to most human weapons. Rick had ordered his troops to switch to electromagnetic pulse weapons, and the EMP blasts were disrupting the Vakreen machines. It was a desperate running battle through the colony streets with civilians fighting, alongside soldiers using mining equipment as improvised weapons. Dr. Amy Wells ran between defensive positions, treating wounded fighters where they fell. She had been a trauma surgeon for 15 years and she had seen terrible injuries before, but this was different. These were her friends and neighbors bleeding in the streets of the colony they had built together. Nurse Greg Harris worked beside her and he was no longer talking about evacuation. He was too busy trying to save lives. When the second Vakreen ship exploded, the ground forces suddenly stopped moving. The metallic warriors stood motionless as if waiting for orders that would never come. Rick ordered a ceasefire and his exhausted soldiers held their positions. Everyone looked up at the sky where they could see the flash of the explosion even in daylight. In orbit, Admiral Peter Grant watched the third Vakreen ship. It had not moved or fired during the entire battle. For long minutes, nothing happened. The human fleet regrouped and Peter counted his losses. Of the 30 ships that had started the battle, only 18 were still combat capable. He had lost good people and good ships, but they had achieved something impossible. They had destroyed a Vakreen warship. Finally, Archon Vex's voice returned to the communication channels. When the Vakreen spoke, its voice was different, quieter, less certain. Vex said that humanity had destroyed one of their ships and had turned their own weapon against them. The being said that this should not have been possible. No species had ever defeated the Vakreen in battle before. Admiral Peter Grant stood on the bridge of the Liberty and stared at the third Vacrine ship that hung motionless in space above New Horizon. His fleet was battered and bleeding. 18 ships remained combat-ready out of the 30 that had started the battle. On the planet below, the colony was damaged and hundreds of people were dead or wounded. But they had survived. Against all odds, humanity had stood against the most powerful force in the Pi galaxy and had not been destroyed. Archon. Vex's voice filled the communication channel, and Peter heard something he had never expected to hear from the Vacrine. Uncertainty. Vex said that humanity had done the impossible by destroying a Vacrine warship and turning their own weapons against them. The being said that in 10,000 years of galactic dominance, no species had ever achieved such a thing. Vex asked how humans had managed it. Peter was exhausted and grieving for his lost crew, but he found the strength to answer. He said that humans had not fought to prove they could defeat the Vacrine. They had fought to protect their people. He said that the difference was important. Fear made you hesitate and question yourself, but love made you strong. The crews who had died had not been afraid of death. They had been determined to save the people they cared about. Vex was silent for a long moment. When the being spoke again, it asked about the mining ship crews who had sacrificed themselves to block the world-breaker beam. Vex asked why civilians would volunteer for certain death. Peter explained that those people had families and friends in the colony below. They had known that if they did nothing, then everyone would die. So they had chosen to give their lives to buy time for others to survive. The Vacrine said that this was not logical. Vex said that the rational choice would have been to evacuate and preserve as many lives as possible. Peter shook his head even though the alien could not see the gesture. He said that logic was not everything. He said that humans had learned long ago that there were things worth dying for, and that protecting the people you loved was at the top of that list. He said that maybe the Vacrine had forgotten this because they had ruled through fear for so long. Vex's metallic form appeared on the main view screen, and the being's surface rippled in ways that Peter had learned to recognize as signs of internal conflict. Vex said that the Vacrine had maintained galactic peace for 10,000 years by ensuring that every species feared them more than they feared anything else. The being said that this system had prevented wars and genocides and extinction events. Vex asked if that did not justify their methods. Ambassador Lisa Monroe's voice joined the conversation from her diplomatic vessel. She said that peace built on fear was not real peace. She said that the Vacrine had created a galaxy where every species was too frightened to grow or explore or advance. She said that was not peace but stagnation. She asked Vex what the point of surviving was if you could never really live. The communication channel was quiet for a long time. Finally, Vex spoke and said that the test was concluded. The being said that humanity had proven itself worthy of respect and negotiation. The Vacrine ground forces on New Horizon's surface deactivated and collapsed where they stood. The third Vacrine ship began to withdraw from the system. But before it left, Vex said something that shocked everyone who heard it. The being said that the Vacrine would consider what humanity had taught them. 3 months passed while New Horizon rebuilt, and the human fleet repaired its damaged ships. The Galactic Council convened to discuss what had happened, and representatives from 200 species gathered to witness something unprecedented. Humanity was granted full membership in the Council, with a voice equal to any other species, including the Vacrine. Jacob Hayes stood in the Great Crystal Chamber as Earth's official ambassador. Beside him sat Archon Vex representing the Vacrine. The two beings who had been enemies now sat as equals. Jacob rose to address the council, and his voice carried clearly through the translation devices. He said that humanity did not come as conquerors or as conquered. He said that humans came as partners ready to work with all species for the good of the galaxy. Jacob said that the battle at New Horizon had taught everyone an important lesson. Fear was a powerful tool, but it was not the only tool, and it was not the best tool. He said that the Vacrine had maintained peace through fear for 10,000 years, but that peace had come at a terrible cost. Every species in the galaxy had been paralyzed by terror and unable to reach their full potential. He said it was time for that to change. Thress, the council speaker, clicked its mandibles and asked how Jacob proposed to change a system that had worked for 10,000 years. Jacob said that the Vacrine did not need to be masters or enemies. They could be teachers and protectors. He said that Vacrine technology and wisdom, combined with the courage and adaptability of humanity and the unique strengths of every other species, could build a real galactic civilization based on cooperation instead of fear. Archon Vex rose and the chamber fell silent. The metallic being's form had changed slightly. It seemed less rigid and more fluid, as if the Vacrine was learning to be flexible. Vex said that humanity had shown them that strength without fear was possible. The being said that humans had demonstrated courage, which was not the absence of fear, but the will to act despite fear. Vex proposed a new compact for the Galactic Council. The Vacrine would share their technology instead of hoarding it. They would protect the galaxy from external threats but would not rule as overlords. Every species would have an equal voice and disputes would be settled through negotiation rather than intimidation. Vex said that this would require trust, which was something the Vacrine had not needed to give for millennia. But humanity had earned that trust through their actions at New Horizon. The vote was unanimous. Every species in the Council agreed to the new compact. The galaxy had changed in a single day. Admiral Peter Grant retired from active service but remained as a strategic advisor to the Earth Defense Fleet. He stood on the observation deck of Earth's primary orbital station and watched as the first joint human and Vacrine research vessel departed for the galactic rim. Lieutenant Commander Karen Foster, who had been promoted after her actions at New Horizon, stood beside him. Karen asked if Peter thought the peace would last. Peter said that peace was not something you built once and forgot about. He said it was something you worked at every day. He said there would be disagreements and maybe even conflicts, but now the galaxy was facing those challenges as partners, instead of as masters and slaves. He said that was worth fighting for. On New Horizon, Dr. Amy Wells visited the memorial in the Central Plaza every morning. The monument bore the names of 417 humans who had died defending the colony. She told her patients that they had done something impossible. They had stood against the most powerful force in the galaxy and had not backed down. She said they had done this not because they were not afraid, but because fear was not a good enough reason to stop fighting for what mattered. Across the galaxy, other species began to find their own courage. Inspired by humanity's example, they started to question and explore and push boundaries that had been firmly set for thousands of years. The Vacrine found themselves in a new role as teachers and mentors, sharing knowledge they had kept secret for millennia. Archon Vex met regularly with human representatives, and the being learned that cooperation could be more rewarding than domination. Ambassador Lisa Monroe sent regular reports back to Earth describing the transformation of galactic society. New exploration missions were launched. Scientific breakthroughs were shared freely. Cultural exchanges brought species together that had barely spoken to each other before. The galaxy was waking up and discovering what it could become when fear no longer held it back. Lisa sent a final message that was broadcast to all of humanity. She said that humans had come to the stars not knowing what they would find. They had found weapons that could destroy worlds and beings that could reshape reality, and a galaxy paralyzed by fear. But they had also found that the human spirit and the refusal to bow before impossible odds was the most powerful force in the universe. She said that humanity had stood unshaken, and in doing so had shown the galaxy how to stand as well. The message ended with words that became humanity's motto among the stars. Fear is universal, but so is courage. The question is which one you choose to follow. And across 1,000 worlds, beings that had lived in shadow for 10,000 years looked up at the stars and chose courage. The galaxy would never be the same because one species had refused to be afraid and had shown everyone else that fear was not the only way to live.